There may be those naive enough to have blind faith in their political system to a greater or lesser extent. Whether it be to believe everything uttered by a government spokesperson, to adhere unquestioningly to the positions of a political party for no other reason than party loyalty, or, perchance, to accept as gospel truth and follow medical advice of an official raking in a huge profit from a pandemic. There is no question that here in the U.S. our government is noble in its overall intent as envisioned by our founding fathers, and is at best, or at worst, depending on one's perspective, a necessary evil. Actually, I personally am reminded of a quote I encountered in Principia Discordia, attributed to one John Kenneth Galbraith, to the effect that one will find that the state is the kind of organization which, though it does big things badly, does small things badly too. Bureaucracy, eh?
I can't help feeling that there's been a big mistake somehow.
But if you consider it, this is mostly the point of our government. Not to be inefficient, but to keep things from happening. Checks and balances. While the whole point is that no one, especially not the president, is burdened with an excess of that most corrupting of ephemera, power. Which means that it is, in theory, difficult for any one person or ideological entity to accomplish anything unilaterally. And thus, the citizens are protected, and it's very difficult to get anything done at all. Make no mistake, government is a necessary appendage of society. It is in fact that glue which holds a body of humans together, whatever form it may take. Many have been tried, and all have strengths as well as weaknesses. But in each and every case, a government is not a distant, infallible entity. It is composed of completely fallible humans. Humans with agendas.
Look at the campaign I started for you in all of my papers.
It's a little obscure, isn't it, Jim?
Well, I don't know, maybe. But after all, you're the logical man from the West for the national ticket.
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington was presented to me as a classic, being defined in the conventional sense as a piece of media that everyone wants to be able to say that they've read, watched, what have you, but which nobody wants to take the time to actually read or watch. Which is a shame. It may even be that it may shake one's faith in government, which is because as far as truth is concerned, it falls all too near the mark.
That's good enough for me.
It amazes me, the duality of awareness that humans are capable of. Everybody knows politicians can't be trusted. There may be exceptions, but I personally cannot point out a living one. And yet, even knowing this, we humans too often cling to the notion that what a given political figure says must be true or false because reasons. Because it's our party, because we like their hair, because we find the narrative comforting, because we love a good scandal, because we dislike the guy and want the bad things someone we do like says about them to be true. I give you, for your consideration, the case of Senator Joe Payne, a well-respected senator known for his honesty and decency, who has been bought and paid for by a special interest. In this case, a corrupt businessman.
I won't let you stand there callously and perhaps wreck my whole political future.
Your political future? Why, I bought it for you. I gave it to you as a present, and I can grab it back so fast it'll make your head swim. You've got a nerve to sit there and worry about your political future when we're in a spot like this?
Normally, I might summarize the plot, but what is so fascinating here, and terrifying, is the machinery that is employed so thoroughly and effectively to discredit Jefferson Smith. Newspapers print false stories, fake news in the jargon of our own times. Experts testify to Senator Smith's guilt. Colleagues whose public perception is that of being beyond reproach denounce him. And all of it is a campaign of orchestrated lies. If it were set in our modern age of social media, Twitter would be aflame with imprecations from users with blue check marks next to their names, all denouncing and condemning him, all speaking with one voice of reproach. It can't help but remind one of mainstream media's behavior during and after a certain former president's tenure in office. In the movie, though all the Senate and all the newspapers and indeed much of public opinion is arrayed against Senator Smith, he never gives up. He never gives in. But all is in vain. Except that his false colleague, Senator Payne, suffers a sudden attack of conscience and publicly declares Smith's innocence and his own guilt before the Senate. But that's because this was made in a time when it was customary for movies to have happy endings. In real life, the public, that is you and I, we have no way of knowing.
Something on your mind. Why don't you tell the people the truth for a change?
Oh, the truth. The man wants the truth. The man wants the truth.
What is the truth? Said jesting Pilate, and would not stay for an answer.
How do you want it, Senator? Dished out or in a bottle? The people of this country pick up their papers and what do they read?
Unless, of course, the story was carried by CNN, in which case we could be fairly certain that it's false based on CNN's track record where accuracy and agenda is concerned. A frightening thought, and a thought that every conscientious citizen should think, as a reminder that truth is often not what everyone knows it to be. What can you do about it? Well, that is the question, isn't it? And not one I can answer for you. But the movie. Check it out. It isn't as dry and boring as you'd think.
It's all right. I think it's all right. A young patriot recites Lincoln and Jefferson turned loose in our nation's capital. Yeah, I think it's all right.
And now we're back for the second half of our show. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is a commentary on many things, including some of the strengths and weaknesses of our own Republican democracy. Many other forms of government have been tried and further have been theorized. Some forms of government, such as the democracy embraced by the Terran Federation and Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, differ from ours only in that to become a franchise citizen, not merely a resident, an individual must demonstrate through service his ability and willingness to put the good of the state above his personal well-being.
Nor are the voters picked men. They bring no special wisdom, talent, or training to their sovereign tasks. So what difference is there between our voters and wielders of franchise in the past? We have had enough guesses. I'll state the obvious. Under our system, every voter and office holder is a man who has demonstrated through voluntary and difficult service that he places the welfare of the group ahead of personal advantage. And that is the one practical difference.
Some have declared that the government therein described is a form of fascism, though in doing so, they do but show they didn't actually read the book. Oops. But Starship Troopers is getting its own episode, owing to the truly ludicrous difference between the book and the movie. Here, we speak of communism. Communism is a tragic and all too human example of how an idea can be amazing on paper and abysmal in practice. The problem is that communism is utopian, attractive to imagine, and wonderful if it could be implemented as dreamed. But as with many a lofty ideal, it's spoiled by the inconvenient detail. The one inconvenient detail. Human nature. It's easy enough to talk about everyone working for the collective good, but the collective good is a poor motivator. Consider anyone who has ever only managed to drag themselves out of bed to go to work on the strength of the knowledge that they damn well be fired if they didn't. We've all been there. You work for your own good because you need the money. If you're lucky, you have a job that you enjoy. Most of us aren't lucky. But if it wasn't your job on the line, if there was some vague collective good that you worked for, and there was no specific consequence you could point to, would you still get up? Or would you hit the snooze button for another 15 minutes? Don't answer that. We already know. Unfortunately, communism depends on everyone, everywhere, choosing to get up anyway. Every day. This is what nearly wiped out the Pilgrims, by the way. It turned out it was a whole lot more motivational to work at growing food because you knew that you'd starve if you didn't, than to toil every day to the best of your ability to feed others, who you may or may not even like. Selfish. But that's us humans, I'm afraid. Fortunately, these early communists were saved from their folly by generous natives who, alas for them, didn't quite understand that sometimes good deeds have unfortunate consequences down the road. Technology helps, of course. Machines don't care whose good they work for, but the weak link is always the human element, which includes the corruption of those in power. There are always true believers, those who will share and even embrace the hardships of the body of citizenry as a whole, because they truly believe in the cause. But all too often, those in power, whatever form of government you have, use their power to acquire luxury. They serve themselves, not the people. It's a perk. In our form of government, those who will not work starve, at least in theory. There are protections in place for those who cannot work, but often those who will not work can exploit them. In communism, you can't afford anyone who will not work. It isn't the individual's problem, it's everyone's problem, because the whole edifice depends on everyone working, regardless of their role. Laziness is a cancer, sapping the people's strength. Any who will not work must be forced to work or dealt with. I trust you see where this is going. Force is required to keep the people in line, to keep them from being selfish. It isn't because those in power are evil, though they might be. It's because if the status quo is not enforced harshly, the whole monstrous edifice of government must inevitably collapse in ruins. Communism is more effective, though never wholly so, in situations where you have a unified group of people with a strong sense of duty and responsibility, and if possible a tradition of obedience. The smaller the group, the better. Personal ambitions and desires are counterproductive. One can improve its performance if a sense of dependence on the state can be fostered, but it is by its very nature and necessity oppressive, and it must inevitably come with its own variant of the KGB. Difficult to swallow in a society like ours that values individual freedoms, but hey, when in Beijing, I suppose. On the other hand, properly administered, an average living standard should be able to be maintained across the board. No super rich, except of course party officials and criminals, but no poor either, at least no one poorer than anybody else, except for those previously mentioned. No worries about losing one's job and starving. No worries about not being able to pay medical bills. Though quality of care may be an issue, and there's always the risk of bureaucracy deciding who with a life-threatening illness is worth saving for the good of the state, and who is not. Pros and cons, eh? And that's all today for our show. If you like what you've seen, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. And remember, we still need a sponsor. Have a pleasant evening.